Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today for the live session. I'm just going to quickly share my screen here to give you that presentation. So today in the session, we'll be discussing OC and selective schools, and I'll be sharing some insights into the gender parity model, discussing any changes to the tests, and also what parents might want to consider when they're selecting school preferences. So I think we've just got a few parents joining in now, so we'll just give them a couple of minutes to hop in. I'll just quickly go over a few important announcements from Alpha One in the meantime. It looks like looking ahead, it looks like we've got a April holiday program that we'll be offering across our branches. So this is a 3-day comprehensive trial test program for both OC and selective students. And then the aim of the program is to simulate the actual exam experience. So in the OCTT and SCTC courses, you might notice that students will sort of complete 2 exams per week. But in the holiday program, they'll actually be sitting through all the sections and then reviewing it at the end of the session as well. So very similar to what the actual experience is in for the OC and selective exam. So enrollments for that are now open. So don't wait, spots do fill up quite quickly. The links are in the bio for more information, and you're more than welcome to contact your nearest branch as well. If you're looking for some extra practice at home, we do have online mock exam packages available for selective. These are available on our website, and they are timed test papers with work solutions. So your child can sharpen up their test taking skills and review their theory. There's also a range of resources available on our OC and selective discussion forums on Facebook. So all of these resources and information are listed below in the description box. So feel free to go ahead and take a look. It looks like we have a good number of parents, so I'll just go ahead and get started. Just a quick note, this seminar is being recorded and it will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel. So if you miss anything, not to worry, you'll catch the full session later under the live tab of our channel. If you have any questions during the session, please feel free to drop them in the live chat. Please note that in order to participate in the actual chat, YouTube does require participants to have a channel. So if you don't have one, there should be a create channel button somewhere in your screen. And after I go through all the information, we'll have a quick seminar and I'll just go through, answer any of your questions that you have. So just dive right in. Just an introduction, my name is Sahana. I'm an academic advisor at Alpha One, and I'm also the manager at the BV branch, as well as a Gillian High School graduate. So with the applications now open and the selective tests and OC exams coming up, I'll walk you through the recent changes to those tests and factors you might want to consider when choosing the schools. So let's just start off with the changes we've got. Number one change it is a change to the number of school preferences. So selective students are able to choose only 3 potential schools. This has been the same over the last few years, but for OC students, the process has been recently updated to 4 schools. So this means you're just given more of a chance to gain your OC enrollment, but keep in mind you might not want to select all 4. It's just up to 4, and we'll have a talk about this in a moment. Another big change is the format of the exams, particularly with reading. So selective will continue to have 4 sections: reading, maths, thinking skills, and writing. And OC will continue to have reading, maths, and thinking skills. But the format has been changed in terms of the number of questions in the reading exam. So there will be 17 questions for selective and 14 questions for OC. And essentially, I believe it is just 3 of those questions will have like multiple parts. So question 1 will have A, B, C, D, and question 2, so on. Within reading as well, there is a new update to the text type with the introduction of collocation text. So collocation is just a phrase or group of words that commonly occur together in English. These word combinations will feel natural because they're repeatedly used across multiple contexts in novels, films, poems, etc. So collocation texts in the way that they're assessed in the selective and OC exam is it'll have a passage with missing words, and the student must choose the most suitable word based on, how it's naturally used in the English language. So we have created new reading modules that focus on collocation texts. These modules will teach students the reasoning behind the word pairings and provide a targeted practice with this new text type. So this ensures that the students are familiar with these style of questions before the exams, and it will help them approach it during the exam with confidence. And finally, as some of you may know, the OC selective exams have transitioned from paper-based to a computer-based format for all the exams. Students won't necessarily need to bring their own device to these exams. They are provided by the location where you're sitting the test. So with the transition, sometimes students can find it particularly difficult to navigate the online platform, especially for things like writing. So it's important that any practice you're doing at home, try and do your best to get them done on the computer so that students can develop their computer skills. We understand that the majority of the past papers right now are in an old format, but it is vital that students get a bit of experience with what the actual test looks like. So the online test packages, those are all online-based tests, so you're able to do it on your device like you do in the actual exam. And all our tests that we offer as part of our OCTT and SCTC programs, as well as the upcoming holiday program, they will also be on an online format so students can adapt and get used to it. Now, the biggest change for this cohort will be the introduction of the gender parity model. So from 2027 onwards, all coeducational selective and partially selective schools, as well as opportunity classes, will have an equal number of places for girls and boys. So the reason behind this change was in a response to a decline in the number of girls applying and accepting places in co-ed selective schools and OC classes. And so the goal is just to reinforce that these programs are for all students and encourage girls and their families to feel confident in applying for that. So the number of places available for each OC school or each selective school is found on the Department of Education's website under the Find a Selective High School or Find an Opportunity Class tab. It'll sort of list the breakdown. So what does this mean for your child? We understand that it is quite a sudden change in especially within the selective and OC system, and it can feel quite unsettling. And many families naturally worry about how this could affect their child's chances. So in previous years, most co-ed schools have enrolled more boys than girls. So, for example, a particular school might have a 60 to 40 boy to girl ratio, and under the new model, it will split this evenly. So, if the school offers 180 available places, 90 are allocated to boys and 90 are allocated to girls. So, in practical terms, this may mean that cutoff scores or the entry level for boys will rise slightly at schools historically with boys more who have historically enrolled more boys, and cutoff schools for girls may ease slightly for the same school to make it a little bit easier for them to get in, essentially. So schools, again, historically have had more imbalanced gender distributions with more boys being enrolled than girls, and so the schools with a, I guess, more distinct imbalance, so with a lot more boys and a lot more girls, might be affected a bit more with the new policy. In these cases, the impact will be felt mainly by students near the cutoff mark or near wherever that entry level is. So on the other hand, schools that have been more balanced are likely to see little change in admission. So the reserve lists are also gender balanced. So if a school has 40 places, then 20 will be allocated for boys on the reserve list and 20 will be allocated for girls on the reserve list as well. So we know that the information is a bit confusing and can cause stress, especially when you're trying to make careful school choices. So we've already updated all of our reports and our OC selective calculator to reflect the new gender parity model. What we've done essentially is analyzed years of historical enrollment data to understand each school's typical gender balance. And then based on this, we've sort of projected cutoff scores to reflect the new 50-50 allocation. So the updates are all complete. Any reports or calculator results you receive are now completely accurate and in line with the model, and will probably provide you a more clear and realistic indication of where your child stands. So the important point from this is that strong exam performance is still important for successful admission. So parents should be aware of the gender parity policy, but for most families, the effect or the practical effect of this is small. Keep in mind that these, especially for selective schools, this is only for co-educational schools, and single-sex schools such as like Hornsby Girls or Normanhurst Boys, this remains unaffected by the gender parity model. So let's go through how to choose schools and what factors to consider. Although applications have just closed, parents are still able to edit their school preferences up until after the exam. I believe it's June 5th. This will give you all some time to see how your child progresses in the last months leading up to the exam, as well as how they performed on the day as well. During this period, you're probably going to see great improvements, so we highly recommend revisiting your preferences to ensure that your child has a best shot at getting into an OC or selective schools. So what sort of things should you consider when making school choices? One is sort of the admission difficulty of the school. So before 2021, we used to have cutoff marks, which made it easier to understand the difficulty of gaining entry into a certain school. Unfortunately, now the results are sent to parents without that cutoff mark. It's bands instead, so makes it a little bit harder to estimate what the admission difficulty is for a specific school. But the way we look at it is how difficult are the schools to get into relative to each other. And the way the admission difficulty of school is estimated is dependent on sort of supply and demand. The schools that are higher in demand are more difficult to get into. So, for example, schools like James Roos attract greater demand because of academic excellence of the students and how they've been performing over the last few years. As a result, gaining entry into those schools will be quite competitive. The demand for selective schools is also partially based over the overall HSC performance. So the way the school ranks in comparison to other schools in the state. So higher ranking schools, North Sydney Boys, James Roos, North Sydney Girls, they have a higher minimum entry score because they perform so well, and a lot of parents are more inclined to go towards a school like that. And then, depending, obviously there are other factors. Location is a big one. Some schools might do so well, but are a bit further away from where the population is. And so the entry score into those schools might be a bit lower. If you'd like to see how your preferred selective or non-selective school ranks in the HSC, you can search for that one on the Better Education website. The table is also over here. So if you want to go back to it after the live is uploaded, you can have a look as well. So another thing to consider with these schools is because a lot of the schools have a similar level of demand for them. So it's important to, when you're placing your school choices, to avoid putting schools that sit closer together. For example, Normanhurst Boys and Sydney Boys, those two schools historically have had a very similar demand for them. So often we've seen students who put Sydney Boys perform at a very similar level to the students who put Normanhurst Boys and gain admission. So if you're looking to put your school choices in, my recommendation is to really avoid placing schools that sit closer together in your preference list. Because, for example, if you put Sydney Boys as your top and Normanhurst Boys as your second preference, if the student doesn't make it into Sydney Boys, unfortunately, it is unlikely that they'll make it into Normanhurst because of how similarly those the performance requirements are for those schools. So it is important to try and select schools that are a little bit more spread apart, just to maximize your chances of gaining admission into one school. So for making the actual school choices, this is an example of our Alpha 1 selective report. You also receive a similar looking report in the online calculator for selective and OC as well. But if I refer back to the actual selective report, the order of your school choices is very important. We always recommend placing your highest ranking school first, so anything that's like sort of towards the top. The reason for this is if your child meets the cutoff mark for the high ranking school, but you've listed a lower ranking school as your first choice, they'll be offered a spot into the lower ranking school regardless. So you might miss out on an opportunity of getting into the higher ranking school. So always put your choices in order of ranking. So in this situation, you would want your first school choice to be in the orange to red zone, something that is just out of your child's just out of your child's range of performance, or in the top of their range of performance. Ideally, usually this is the school that you're kind of your goal school or your dream school. The second choice will be something that's more in the orange to green zone. So these orange and green schools are schools that are attainable. The lower down you go in the green school, it is the lower in the green school is the safer the option. So if you want to go for a safety net school, you definitely go for something in the green area. So with these ones, in this particular situation, I would say the choice one would be something like Sydney Boys or Normanhurst. Normanhurst would probably be a bit of a safer choice, but again, as I mentioned, it's completely up to what your goal school or dream school is. Orange zone to green zone, these schools will be your second choice. So Sydney Girls, Sydney Girls, Chatswood, all of these are a good second choice. And then your third choice, again, is that safety net school. And that school, the last choice, is dependent on quite a few factors. We recommend choosing the lowest selective school you're willing to send your child to as your last option. And that may be dependent on multiple different reasons. It could be dependent on high HSC ranking, how the school compares to your local school, or how the school compares to any offers you've received from private schools. So I'll give you an example. For example, parents who live in that Cherrybrook Tech catchment often tend to opt for sending their students to their local school, Cherrybrook Tech, as opposed to lower ranking selective schools. This is because the average ranking for Cherrybrook Tech has been around the 80 to 100 region. And that is significantly better than some of the lower ranking selective schools like Blacktown Boys or Tempe. And even though those are selective schools and Cherrybrook Tech is non-selective, so their third option might be something a little bit higher depending on what their specific needs are. So if you're less keen on going towards your local school, then you would place a lower ranking selective school, something well into the green zone, that will accommodate for you better. So this is for the parents who much prefer any selective school as opposed to their local high school or private school. And for parents that have a good local catchment school or have gotten a good offer from a private school, then they might choose something that's a bit higher in the green zone as their last option. So the less risk you want to take, so if you want to almost guarantee a spot in the selective high school, the further down the green zone you want to go, because that means you're choosing a school that is lower ranking and much easier to get into. The benefit of choosing a lower ranking school, again, as I mentioned earlier, is it acts as a safety net that supports your child in the event that they underperform in the actual exam. So for OC applications, you can note down 4 preferences. So similar to selective school, you want your first option to be something higher ranking, like a dream school, and then the others will be lower, somewhere in the orange to green zone. So you have up to 4 preferences, but if you find that you're only willing to apply to 2 to 3 schools, that's absolutely fine. So for OC students, especially, something to consider specifically would be location for safety reasons, and we'll get into that one in a bit. And so I think it's important to identify which schools you want to go for rather than trying to get all four options, like getting a school in for all 4 options. It's probably a better idea to specifically look at the schools that you're actually willing to send your child to and apply for those ones. Just a reminder that our OCTT and SCTC reports here have more accurate results in terms of the school rankings, just because we're able to compare alongside factors like exam difficulty and how the cohort performed in general. Our calculator is a free tool that we provide to parents for any external tests to Alpha One, but because it has no cohort comparisons and ranking information, might not be as accurate as our child test class reports. And just another thing to point out is all the reports here are dependent on the gender parity model. So these reports will show you the specific school rankings based on your child's gender and their performance against the rest of the cohort. Another factor to consider is location. So one of the most frequently asked questions that I get from parents is, should I prioritize a school that is closer to me or a school that's higher ranked? And again, this is dependent on everyone's unique context, but some questions that you might want to consider is, how close is the school to your home? What would be the most convenient mode of transportation? How long will it take one way to reach the school? And how much are you and your child willing to travel? So for OC parents, it's understandable to avoid schools that require the student to use public transportation. OC schools that I recommend applying for are those within a 10 to 15-minute drive and do not require too much travel, because students are much younger and excessive travel can be quite tiring and confusing for them. So in the case of OC school selection, I would probably prioritize something like convenience. And you can order your school preferences in terms of the school's distance away from your home. So again, I recommend starting by identifying how much you or your child are willing to travel, and what that distance and transportation you'd be comfortable with. And this varies from person to person, but as long as you establish that baseline, it will make it easier for you to prioritize and select schools that fit your convenience and academic needs. So it's a good idea to prioritize the schools that are closer to you by placing them at the top of your preferences, and schools that are further away can go lower down on your list. Excessive travel for selective students can mean that students will have to wake up early, come back home late, leaving them tired and unmotivated with limited energy to complete homework and assignments. And the reason why it's important for high school students is that you need to consider that they will be traveling to school 5 days a week for 6 years of their education. So in senior high school as well, year 11 and 12, many students will have extra classes in the morning, which might leave them less time for proper rest. Longer travel time will have an impact on their energy levels, time management, and ability to engage in social and extracurricular activities. But again, this varies from student to student. A lot of students are comfortable with traveling longer distances and will not be as impacted by it compared to other students. So it was always a good idea to sort of investigate what the transportation options are close to you and if it's convenient, and whether your child will feel comfortable doing that, the distance to go to the school. Safety is also another factor to keep in mind. Students at selective schools might have to commute a fair distance, usually alongside friends and classmates, which is always good and might make you feel a bit more comfortable to travel that far and feel less impacted by how tiring it may be. However, if the school is too far, then it's less likely the student will travel in larger and safer groups. So as a sort of personally, in my high school experience, one of the aspects that I was the most grateful for was the minimal travel involved. I lived a short walk from Gurween High School, and my parents intentionally chose not to select a school like North Sydney Girls or Hornsby Girls as their preference, even though they were high performing, just because of how long the commute was. And this decision personally made a big difference in my daily routine, because without the extra stress of excessive travel, I felt less tired and was more focused compared to some of my friends who spent 45 minutes or more traveling each way. So in cases where travel can involve multiple modes of transport, buses or bus train or bus doing 2 trains or train and a walk, excessive travel time that exceeds, say, an hour and a half, we usually recommend sticking to schools that are more in a convenient location. Another thing to consider would be extracurricular subjects. So this section is only for selective students. So in the future, high school students will need to consider the extracurriculars or subjects that the school might offer. And you might find that your child has a specific interest in a particular subject, and you might want to prioritize finding schools that support them in that way. So all schools teach the same fundamental subjects: English, maths, science, history, geography, and the only area that schools really differ are in terms of their less popular subjects, along with the availability of accelerated programs. So accelerated programs are subjects that students are able to complete a HSC unit much earlier in the year, such as in year 10 or year 11. And often for students in selective schools, these are highly sought out just because it allows the students to space out their time and effort over a longer period of time, and reduce the stress that they have in their actual year 12 HSC year. So in my time at Girraween, I had the opportunity to take the accelerated chemistry course, which proved to be highly beneficial for me because it allowed me to complete the year 9 and 10 science curriculum in 1 year. And then I did the year 11 syllabus in year 10. And then in year 11, I completed my HSC chemistry. And so it allowed me to finish one subject ahead of schedule and give me more time and a lighter workload in year 12, so I could focus on whatever HSC subjects I had remaining. So as I mentioned, highly sought after by a lot of students and parents, because it allows them to be a bit more efficient with their time and complete less units in year 12. Please note that not every school offers accelerated programs, and if they do offer it in different subjects. So Gurien High School, to my understanding, does a lot of accelerated science, so chemistry and biology and investigating sciences. But Baulkham Hills runs completely separate accelerated courses such as ancient history or economics. And another thing to consider is that the accelerated program is not limited to just selective schools. There are some partially selective or local high schools that offer an accelerated class to academically gifted students. So if you're after, certain subjects and you are after a particular program, I highly recommend contacting your preferred school to see what they have available for you. Another thing to consider are extracurriculars. Some schools offer great music programs like Fort Street, and some offer really good sporting opportunities like Sydney Boys. Certain schools also offer exchange programs, like that's dependent sort of on the languages that the student might choose to pursue in high school. So Gurien High School has a sister school in Japan, and that allows them to facilitate exchange programs and hosting programs for students who study Japanese in year 12. In year 10. Some schools offer, specialized leadership and creative arts or visual arts opportunities. So if you find that your child might have a specific area like sport or creative arts that they're very keen on and very interested in, it's a really good idea to research your options and find schools that have unique programs that align with your interest and with your child's interest. They might just feel more comfortable sort of being in a school that supports them in their interests and also them academically. Just because we do want children to be well-rounded, and selective schools are getting much better at supporting students' development beyond academics. So it's important to be aware of extracurricular programs and opportunities that schools offer to nurture these skills in areas outside of academics as well. A lot of schools do offer open days. So if you're interested in a particular selective school or even a local school, I would highly recommend tagging along for their open day. You can just have a better look at how the school looks, what kind of resources and facilities do they offer, what is the teaching style like, and it might give you a bit more clarity on how unique each student's high school experience can be depending on the school that they get into. So preparation, what can we do now? The most important thing to do is practice. Continuing to do practice papers, mock exams, and review the concepts and topics that your child finds differently. If you're doing the STTC program or the OCTT program, you'll find that the reports do break down the types of questions that appear in each exam. So if you find that your child is getting a certain type of question wrong consistently, such as data interpretation or area and perimeter, then you'll know that you need to put a bit more extra practice at home to ensure that your child's understanding of that concept becomes stronger. A good way to do this is look at previous WEMT booklets. If you were enrolled in that previously, the theory section can re-explain those particular concepts to students. You're also welcome to reattempt your SCC or OCTT exams as well. The copies of those are available on your student portal. And so, coming off doing the copy exams, it's really important that students start to work on their time management. Typically, the time distribution for exams should be around 1 minute per question, which can be quite difficult, and therefore it requires a lot of practice. So from now on, I recommend doing any mock exams or practice papers or any sort of practice questions you're doing under timed conditions, whether it's at Alpha 1 or it's at home. It'll just help your child get used to doing the exams and completing those questions under time constraints, and also identify the types of questions that your child might find time consuming, because they can be completely different and vary from child to child. When it comes to choosing schools, again, there is plenty of time to improve before the exam, and it also gives you time to change your preferences. We recommend the parents use our OCTT reports, SCTC reports, or the calculator to get a more accurate sense of which schools your child is likely to get into as the exam approaches. These tools will provide you a clearer progress of a clearer idea of your child's progress as we reach the exam date. We've also found that students improve at a greater rate leading up to the exam. So it's really crucial now to focus on targeted preparation, get the ball rolling on your child's success. Again, our April holiday program is also coming up, so it's a great opportunity to focus on honing in on your child's exam and time skills. And it's just 1 month before the exam, so it'll probably provide you the clearest picture on how your child is doing. And the reports that you receive from the April holiday program are likely to be the most reflective of how your child will be doing in the exam, and that might make things a bit easier for you in terms of identifying what schools your child is likely to get into. So these are our available and recommended resources. For current Alpha 1 students, you are more than welcome to request reprints of WEMT booklets, and also copies of your OCTT and SCTC exams. If you're interested, just contact your branch and they'll be happy to provide you further information on how to access that. For reprints, if you're after getting physical materials, please note that there is a small service fee of $3 per booklet, since the printing is done by an external service. Definitely join our OC and selective discussion Facebook page to access worksheets that cover a wide range of topics. These are also available on WeChat groups for our Chinese-speaking parents. For selective students, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have those online mock exams available to purchase. You can find these under the resource tab on our website or in the description box below. Feel free to use the selective OC calculator or the writing feedback tool. These are all under the tools tab on our website. Now, the writing section, it is often forgotten by a lot of students and parents, so it's really crucial for students who might be a little bit on the weaker end for writing to put that extra effort to improve their skills and boost their marks, and the best way to do so is through consistent practice. So the writing feedback tool is there for when students are doing any practice writing exams at home in their own time. They are able to upload their writing onto the feedback tool, which then sort of provides you with detailed feedback on areas that might be struggling in, such as grammar, structure, or clarity, and it will identify specific issues and offer specific tips on how to improve in those areas. So using the feedback tool regularly can keep track of your progress and identify the key areas for your improvement, so you can focus on the right things and build stronger writing skills over time. Again, a lot of this is linked in the description box below, so please take a look when you have a chance. If you're still a bit confused on your school preferences, and you're wanting to get more clarity on how to choose schools for your for your child specifically. We do have a team of academic advisors who are available to do a 30-minute consultation with you. The link to the consultation is on the screen here, and just make sure you're selecting the right branch, and then someone will be able to help you out and like look at all your child's reports and provide you with guidance on which areas to improve on and which schools are probably the best choice for your child at that stage. So I hope I have been able to provide you with some insight on how to choose the right OC or selective schools. We'll start the Q&A session now. So if you have any questions, just feel free to comment that on the video and we'll try our best to answer them. I'll just go on to the first question. So for overseas students, will they have an equal opportunity to local students? What will they need? And will overseas primary school rankings be considered? This information is available on the New South Wales government website, and it states that students who are overseas or interstate will need to return to New South Wales to do the placement test in person. And if they're not able to do that, unfortunately, they won't be considered for placement in a selective school. For residency requirements, the parents must be aware that the student and the families must be living in New South Wales at the beginning of the school year, and there are specific conditions that apply to students who are not Australian citizens or permanent residents of Australia or citizens of New Zealand. So those specific terms and conditions are available on the Department of Education website, and I think it does depend on your citizenship or residency status. Is the session recorded? Yes, it is recorded. It's all available under the live tab in our YouTube channel, so you're more than welcome to go and rewatch that after we're done today. Will they be using desktop computers with keyboards or mouse on the exam day? I don't believe so. They'll be using laptops, so similar to the Chromebooks that we provide at Alpha One. There's no like separate keyboard. It's just all in that Chromebook. And as far as my understanding, they will be able to request a mouse on the exam day. That's sort of what happened last year, but I'm not sure if they're introducing any changes yet. This question asks, I'm just wondering, on computer-based writing tasks, do they need to type or can they write on a writing pad? They will need to type. There's no writing pad or anything, so they do need to type out their exam. So if your child is sort of struggling with their typing skills, highly recommend doing a typing test every day just to improve them with speed and accuracy, so they're able to get through that exam with making very little errors due to typing. So again, that just comes down to making sure your child is doing writing practice and is doing the writing practice on a device. Is it worth it to choose a school from the green section if that is about 1 hour driving? So again, this is dependent specifically on the parent and the child. I think if your local school, your local high school is a good school, it ranks well, people who go into that school, they have really good resources, then it might be more worth it to send the student to the local school, just because 1 hour driving might be quite difficult to commit to every single day. If the student is also required to take public transport, then I'm assuming it's longer than 1 hour driving. It might not. Personally, I don't think it would be worth it. However, if you are uncertain about your local school, or you think that it might not be suited to your child, then it might be something you want to consider. I think it just depends on your preferences in terms of whether you are comfortable with driving your child to and from school each day, and whether they will feel tired or stressed out because of the travel period. I think in my opinion, it probably wouldn't be worth it. And you'll definitely find good local schools or good partially selective schools that are in the green zone and within your or closer to you than 1 hour driving. Hi, can we change the school preference after submitting the OC registration? Yes, you can. So as long as you've submitted your application, that was due February 20th, you are able to change your school preferences up until, I think, 4 weeks after the exam. So you can log in now and change them around, and you can change the order of it. You can change the schools specific schools that you've put in. That's all. You're all able to do that until June 5th. Next question: is it wise to put a co-ed school as a first option and boys only school as the second for the same level of selective schools ranking? I personally wouldn't recommend that, just because, and let's just take an example that you're referring to, James Roos and North Sydney boys, both schools very high in demand. They have quite a high entry level. And for example, James Roos is co-educational and North Sydney boys is obviously a same-sex school. So if your child doesn't make it into James Roos, then it's very unlikely that they would have made it into North Sydney boys as well, just because the I guess performance required to make it into those schools are very similar. So if they don't make it into James Roos, then they won't really make it into North Sydney boys, and unfortunately, that would mean that you've just missed out on two options or wasted two options. So in this situation, I would probably choose between either the co-ed or the boys only school, just to make sure that you aren't really wasting any option, especially if it's on the same level of entry difficulty. Would you recommend repeating year 6 if they didn't get into selective school? I probably would not. It does require approval from school principal, and they will need, it's a very long process to repeat the school. And unfortunately, I'm not sure if that will help with making it into a selective school. The other option, and what a lot of parents do and have done, and there's a lot of success in this, is transferring into a selective school later on in your high school years. So after year 7, if your child doesn't make it in for year 7, they are able to reapply for selective schools all the way up until year 11. Each process is different. So some selective high schools will require certain processes. Some selective schools will require completely different processes. So sometimes you might have to do an exam called the HAST test. So most fully selective schools like Baulkham Hills, Normanhurst, Girraween, they require students to do a HAST exam, along with submitting an application. And some selective schools, mostly partially selective schools, require doing just require your application or portfolio, and the portfolio will need to demonstrate that your student is a well-rounded student, so not only academically gifted, but is doing some kind of extracurricular, volunteering, leadership, things like that. And if you don't make it in for year 7, it's really not the end of the world. My younger sister, she didn't make it into a selective school in year 6, but she transferred into a partially selective school in year 9, and then last year, she did the HAST exam and has transferred again into a fully selective school. So it's definitely possible. And so in situations like this, I don't think repeating year 6 will have that much of a benefit, as opposed to trying to reapply later on in your high school years. The next question: for OC, is it worth it to go to a low-ranking OC class with low overall NAPLAN results than to stay in the original school with high overall NAPLAN? And in this situation, the parents suggested that distance is not a problem. So if the original, I think it obviously NAPLAN is something you might want to consider, but if the original school is a good school, your child is comfortable in the school, their peers are also, academically gifted, or in this case, have a higher overall NAPLAN sort of school, I don't think that there would be a very strong reason to change the student's environment to go to an OC school. But even though it performs worse, OC doesn't necessitate that your child will definitely get into a selective school. It just provides a gift. It's like a gifted and talented class. So if you feel that your student's current environment is stimulating them academically, and they're comfortable in the environment, I'm not sure that it would be. I don't think it would make sense to move to a OC school, a school that's has an opportunity class, but still performs worse. So I think it's a good idea to also just consider the environment of your schools. A lot of schools offer gifted and talented classes that are not OC related. My primary school did. So even though I didn't get into an OC school, I did go into a gifted and talented class in my primary school. It all does have like a very similar effect on helping students be stimulated academically and intellectually. So yeah, for this situation, I think there would be no reason to change a student's environment for the OC one if the NAPLAN results are poorer than your current school. Do you know how many students put which school as their first choice in 2025? We don't know the specific details, at least for sort of statewide. We do have data on what previous Alpha 1 students selected as their first choice and what schools that they made it into. I think that information is available on our Facebook group. And if you still want some further clarity, you can just give your local branch a ring. But we have the data on which preferences the student put down, and then what bands they got for each of the subjects, and then which selective school they ended up making it into. We do have that data, but not for sort of statewide, just for our students. How better to differentiate between a fully selective and a partially selective school? It's a great question. The biggest difference is the number of, I guess, positions open. A fully selective school is all the students in that school have done the selective exam and then, passed that entry level and have made it in. So all of the students are past a certain level of certain academic threshold. Partially selective schools, of the entire school, there might be only 1 or 2 classes that are selective classes, and the rest of the school are local. The rest of the school is like a local or comprehensive high school. So I think that's sort of the biggest difference. So in terms of the position you will have more positions for selective schools, but because the entire school has passed that sort of academic threshold, it is often a lot harder to make it into a selective school than it is to a partially selective school. So a partially selective school, again, has less seats, so it might have only 30 or 60 seats, but the cutoff mark or the level that you would need to pass is a bit lower than what you would need for a selective school. In partially selective schools as well, you might want to know that up until year 7 to 10, they'll be sort of separated in terms of there'll be 2 classes of partially selective students and the rest are comprehensive students. But then in year 11, 12, they all mix anyway. And the reason for that is just there's simply not enough resources to cater to continue doing the partially selective thing in year 11 and 12 because there's only a set level of subjects that students can choose to pursue in the HSC. So that's sort of the biggest difference. There are lots of good partially selective schools that are well ranking and students have gotten into the partially selective school and done amazingly in the HSC, and gotten into a great university. But often the partially selective schools do rank in the HSC a little lower than students in the selective school. And because fully selective schools also have a cohort of students who are at a similar level academically, the scaling factors in the HSC exam, so they will look at how the entire cohort performs as well. And if students in a selective school, because their entire school year has performed well, it can boost their mark up slightly, and partially selective schools don't have that added benefit. So that's why a lot of parents tend to go for the fully selective option. So that's probably the biggest difference between the two of them. And partially selective schools are also great schools to act as a stepping stone between going into a fully selective school. If you get an offer to a partially selective school, I highly recommend taking it unless it's extremely far away from you or inconvenient, just because it will, number one, give the student that environment to be in a class, at least surrounded by students who are also academically inclined, and also might give them a good foundation to move to a selective school later on in their high school year. Are the homeworks and the copies of the exams when completed considered as well when reports are presented to parents? Unfortunately not. We do create reports for each week's content, but for homework exams, it won't be considered, just because we don't have the same cohort completing those exams each week. So in those cases, you can definitely go and use the OC Selective calculator on our website, but unfortunately the reports won't be created for the copies and homeworks of those exams on your portal. We are doing the intensive English, and there's no feedback QR code in the workbooks anymore. Have I missed something? No, so I think for the intensive English, at the beginning of the booklet, you'll have the link to the form, and the link to the form is also available on your portal account under materials and solutions. So you can I'm not sure if the QR code is still there, but the link to the form is available on the portal and also in the front of your booklet. But if you're still having any difficulty finding it, definitely just contact us and we can send it through to you. How does reserve and offer decisioning work? Great question. So in terms of offer decisioning, essentially, if there's like a cutoff point for a school, let's say Gerwin, the students, and remember there's a gender parity model for co-educational schools. So if their they have a cutoff point, then the highest, the top performing, the 60 top performing students, 60 top performing female students will be who have selected Gerwin as their option, and the 60 top performing male students who have selected Gerwin as their top option will be offered a position in the school. And that's just sort of how it goes. So another way to think about it is they will get all the students' exams and their marks and everything, and then rank them from 1 to how many over 10,000. And the person who ranks number 1 will be given their first choice. The person who ranks number 2 will be given their first choice, and the choices are just given out until the positions in the school are no longer available. And for reserve offers, if all the positions are sort of have been taken already, the remaining students who have placed, they'll have like a range of scores or range of performance bands that they will consider for their reserve list, because they can't put everyone on the reserve list. So say they'll take the next 50 students who didn't get an offer, they'll put them on a reserve list. The reserve list is they don't actually give you the specific position you're in. You're not told if you're number 5 or number 50, but you are given a band. So you're either given band A or reserve band B or C. And that just is like a likelihood of it's how likely you are to receive a call from them about whether you've gotten the spot or not. So usually what we've seen in the past is students in the A to C bands, they often hear back from them quite quickly and they're offered a spot. And then usually the last 2 D and E bands, it's a little bit uncertain. And I'm not sure how that, and again, because we've got the gender parity model even for reserve lists, I'm not sure how that will change things in terms of how fast you'll hear back from them. But with the reserve list, for example, if a boy from Gerwin High School rejects their offer, then the first boy on the reserve list will be given their offer instead, if that makes sense. That's how it works. So students who are reserve band A to C are likely to hear a positive response within 3 months, and D to F, it's a bit uncertain about whether they'll hear from them or not. If you have a offer from a school, say you have an offer from your second choice school, and you also have a reserve offer from your first choice school, that happens to a lot of parents, completely normal. You will need to make a decision by the end of the year. I think it's like 3 months after you've received your results, as to whether you want to stay in the school you've been offered and be removed from the reserve list, or reject your current offer and wait to hear back from the reserve list. Obviously, in situations like this, I recommend just taking the offer you have and sort of disregarding the reserve, but there is quite a bit of time until it gets to that point. And if you're at that point, it's really hard for you to decide, then definitely just reach out to us and we can help you with that. Other homework and copy of the exams considered. Oh, sorry, I just read the same question again. Do you provide any service with after exam result assessment and mock ranking before the cutoff of modifying school preferences. Yeah, so after the exam, you can definitely, we have lots of parents book in a consult with us. We can definitely help you with sort of looking at how the student went in the exam based on what they're saying, and how and whether to change your preferences or how to change those preferences. That's definitely a possibility. Again, June 5th is when you can modify your preference, until when you can modify your preferences. Welcome to book a consult with us or reach out to us anytime until then. In selective, do all subjects have the same weighting? Yep. It's 25% for all the subjects. And same with OC, it's also, each subject is also weighted equally. Are Alpha 1 mock tests similar to the real tests? Some say that they are easier. So this is a great question. So Alpha 1, we've been doing sort of statistical analysis of over the last year, like 5-6 years, that compare our exams to the actual exam and the selective test, and we are consistently modifying the difficulty of our questions to align with that. So from the feedback that sort of we've received from parents, so once they finish their selective exam, we reach out to parents who've done it, and then we get them to sort of provide us a little overview of how they specifically felt the exam went and which subjects were easier, and provide us some more details. That will then allow us to adjust our own exam. So over the years, we've been told that our exams are really similar to what the selective exam is, except for maths. Our maths exams have historically been harder than the selective test, which is always a good thing for students and parents. And then for the other subjects, right, reading and thinking skills, it is, we've been told that we've received feedback that it is very, very similar. And we are constantly looking to adjust our tests to reflect how the actual exam goes. With change in reading section and the number of questions dropping to 14, does it impact the total exam time for the reading section? Yes. I think they have made it a little bit longer, and I think we have also, I think they've extended the exam by 5 minutes, and that's also been reflected in our exams as well. How to improve collocation at the stage? Yeah, this is a great question. We have these reading modules that are available for you. I think they essentially, in these modules, will be sort of breaking down the collocation and giving you guys a lot of examples. The best way to do it, there are worksheets available, like existing worksheets available online that you can check out as well, just to get an idea of what the style of question is. Collocation has been integrated into our future STTC and OCTT exams, so we'll have a look then. And I think biggest advice I can give to you about improving any sort of reading style question is just doing as much practice as possible. Can we change the school choices several times? Yep, literally unlimited amount of times, but only until the 5th of June. STDC reading question pattern, which look and feel display same as Alpha 1 STDC. I'm not 100% sure what the question means. My inference is, in terms of the way our exams are on the portal, like in terms of the students doing STDC and OCTD, we have tried to mimic the interface as much as possible. We have received information that some of it's a little bit different, so we are still trying to update that and change that. But if the display of the questions, in terms of how collocation is and how you select your responses, we're trying to make it as similar as it is to the actual selective exam. I chose 2 co-ed schools and 1 girls' school. Is it a safe choice for my daughter in terms of gender parity rules? Yeah, I think it is. I don't really see, depending on the co-ed school, I don't think it's an unsafe choice. I think what a lot of parents might find is they feel a bit more comfortable going towards a single-sex school, like a girls' or a boys' school, just because it's not affected by the gender parity model, and it makes it a little bit easier. Or you might find it a bit more reassuring that that your entry is not really affected by the gender aspect. But again, a lot of the selective schools are co-ed, so I think what you've chosen is totally fine. I don't see any issues with it. Are gifted and talented classes in local high schools comparable to selective school standards? That's a great question. So I think the gifted and talented in local schools can be similar, definitely, But I think selective schools are just a bit, the way that they're different is that the level of difficulty of their exams and the content that they study is slightly harder. So they all have, everyone across New South Wales needs to study the same content, same curriculum, but the questions that are given to students in selective schools and partially selective schools, in terms of the exams and how they learn the content, will be a little bit more challenging. Selective schools also do have a slightly more accelerated pace. What I mean by that is they typically do finish, say, in year seven, they'll finish all of the year seven content by middle of year seven, and then they'll start year eight content at the end of year seven. Not a lot of local high schools do that. So G&T, the pacing it's not really centralized. It does depend from school to school. Usually the pacing is the same across the school. They don't have that accelerated component, and the questions they receive might not be as challenging as a selective school, but they still have the way that they're similar is the fact that the student is surrounded by other students in the class who are equally academically gifted. Given your comments on choosing schools not close in ranking, would you consider Sydney Girls High and Fort Street close? Let me have a look. So I would probably say those two schools are quite close, and I wouldn't really recommend putting them both in your preference. Again, just because I think if you don't make it into Sydney Girls, for example, the likelihood of you getting into Fort Street is a little bit it's not very likely. So if you can, definitely space out your preferences. So instead of Fort Street, you might want to go for something like Penrith instead. That might just allow a little bit more leeway in terms of your school choices. Are the three student choices transparent to each school? Will the third school choice hesitate to offer if the student is offered or waiting list by first, second? That's a great question. The schools themselves don't actually have like access to what your choices are and what your marks are or anything. It's completely done by like a third party. You will only receive an offer, like a proper offer, by one school. So if you get into your first school preference, say you put, Sydney Boys your first preference, you make it into Sydney Boys, you won't receive any offers from the remaining two, second or third preference. If you receive a reserve offer from Sydney Boys and an actual offer from Penrith, then you won't hear from your third school at all. So if you've received an offer, that's it. You can't hear from any of the other schools. The schools won't really, they won't be hesitant to offer, like, if you've been, waitlisted for anything else. So you might be waitlisted for your second choice and get a offer from your third school. It's not really, it's a very systematic process. The school themselves won't really look at anything, and they're not really biased by that when they're giving you your offer. Is the school selection report you provide accurate in terms of getting into that school on the basis of the child's performance in SCTC? Yes, we try our best to get as accurate results as possible. The way we collect our results is we get the data from our previous cohorts, and we use that and we're constantly adjusting our school ranking that we provide to you on the report, based on how we've seen it happen in the past. Again, we can't really guarantee anything, and we can't guarantee results. It is just a guide, and many factors on the day can change the outcome. Stress and any other situation, sickness, whatever. But we have, from our feedback, we have heard that students who have selected schools based on what they've seen consistently over their reports, those are the schools that they typically do get offers from. So we try to be as accurate as possible, 100%, and we have heard some positive feedback in terms of our reports. Does the adjustment factor apply to all selective and partially selective schools for ATAR? I'm not 100% sure what you're referring to in terms of adjustment factor. So if someone can clarify that would be great. Is it possible for Alpha to recommend school choices based on their overall past exam performance rather than results from individual exams? This is a good question. So the current report system that we have, it is for individual exams, because we just don't have the software at the moment in terms of giving you an average. But that's where our academic advisor team comes into play. They can look at each of your individual reports and like give you advice on the average. They're able to ascertain what the average performance is by looking at each report. So if you're looking for something to sort of give you that kind of average, then I'd recommend reaching out to the academic advisor team for sure. If I choose a school in green as my third choice, does this reduce my chances to the third choice made to cut off? Only because the school will choose students over me who have given it as their first. Nope. As I mentioned earlier, no one gets access to what the rankings are. They don't really it's not like I know for local high schools it can often be preferential like that, but for these schools it's solely based on performance in the exam. If the student reaches the entry level for that school, regardless of whether that was their first, second, or third choice, they will be offered a spot if the spot is available. They don't really choose based on where the school is on the preference list. Our results solely based on the student's test performance, or our school assessment marks taken into account. In the past, it used to be based on like school assessments and stuff. That's no longer the case. It's a standardized test, so only the performance on the exam day will be taken into account in their calculation. Giving this parent is giving Balcombe Hills first and Hornsby as second. Is that a safe choice? Yep, that's totally fine. Those schools have a good gap in between them, so you're not really choosing schools that are too close to each other, and so that definitely gives you some more leeway in terms of whether you get onto the school or not. So I'd say that's perfectly fine. I purchased online exams from Alpha, but it doesn't have the collocation questions. Yeah, I'm not sure if the online exams do have those at the moment. I think I will need to just check with the content team, to see if and when they're adding them in. But there are some reading modules. You could definitely reach out to your branch, and they're more than welcome to provide you with some worksheets we have for collocation. Can you help with the cutoff for 4th Street and Penrith School for a boy? They have similar cutoff. Is it safe to choose these as first and second choice? Let's have a look at the 4th Street and Penrith. I think it's okay. He's like, from what we've seen historically, 4th Street is closer to say Girraween and like Normanhurst than it is to Penrith, so it's fine. But I would personally, if you're able to put something, maybe not 4th Street, something a bit higher like Girraween, probably recommend that instead. Yeah, but I think 4th Street and Penrith is okay. Like the distance between them, from what I've seen before, is like big enough. But if you're a bit nervous about taking that risk, then I would say maybe shift your 4th Street option a bit higher. Do OC students need to practice on laptop, or is iPad okay to simulate the actual exam? I would recommend a laptop, because in the actual exam they won't be there's no touch screen or anything. It's all like the keypad and everything. So if you have a laptop, I would recommend trying to go with that as your just using that to do the practice for OC and selective students. But if you have only an iPad, then I think you can purchase like Bluetooth keyboards and keypads, and you can give get the student to do that one for practice. But if you're able to avoid an iPad, I would recommend just going for the laptop instead. Is it safe to have Balcombe Hills, Girraween, and Penrith based on their current ranks? Yep, that's totally fine. There's enough gap between those schools. I guess the only maybe area that I would probably say, or to keep an eye out on, is the distance between Girraween and Penrith. I think over the years, especially for the HSC, Penrith has, become close to Girraween, and so the demand for Penrith has increased slightly. So I would recommend maybe seeing if there's another option, if you're okay with not putting Penrith as your third option, and something a little bit lower. But if Penrith is, the lowest selective school you want to send your child to, then it's completely fine. The gap between them, as I mentioned, like for a parent earlier, 4th Street and Penrith, gap between them is big enough that it should be okay. But I think if you would like that additional safety net, then I would recommend going a bit lower than Penrith. When choosing between Girraween and Penrith, which one should be listed as first choice? Okay, yeah, based on the latest HSC rankings, Girraween is ranked below Penrith, but it's the other way around in Alpha 1. Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, for the HSC ranking, currently, as of 2025, Penrith is ranking higher than Girraween. However, the reports that we give you and then even the admission into a selective school isn't actually based on HSC rankings. It's based on demand. And so schools like Girraween often have higher demand because, one, historically, they've been performing better than Penrith. Over the last 2 or 3 years is when, that we've seen those rankings reverse. So often parents find a bit more comforting that Girraween's been doing okay on average over the last few years. And secondly is Girraween and like the location difference. Girraween is often a school, or from what I've heard, more convenient for a lot of parents to get to. Penrith is a little bit further away from a lot of parents, and so they might be a bit more hesitant to put that in as their option, and therefore the demand for Penrith is a bit lower, and therefore the admission difficulty or the entry level to get into Penrith will be lower than Girraween as well. So that's probably why you're seeing that discrepancy between HSC rankings and our reports, because the reports are based on demand, not necessarily the ranking in the HSC. If a student accepts an offer from the second school and is on the wait list from the first, can the student still join the first school in year 8 if the seat opens up? That's a good question. Unfortunately, not. You will need to make a decision between whether you want to stay on the reserve list for the first school or accept the offer from the second school before you actually begin in year 7. So by first week of year 7, all the data for all those reserve offers and stuff for the selective school will no longer really mean anything. So if you make it into the second school and you decline your wait, don't want to be on the reserve list for the first school, you won't be given priority in year 8 if you reapply again. That you getting into that school in year 8 will be dependent on your application and your HAST exam performance in year 7. So it doesn't really matter. Your reserve list position will no longer matter after, I think it's December of 2026. Does the gender parity model make it easier for does the gender parity make it easier for a girl to get into a co-ed more or all girls schools more? So again, gender parity doesn't really affect the girls schools at all. There will be, I guess, small changes in terms of demand. A lot of parents will now prefer to put in, girls schools as their preference. So the demand for the school will go a bit higher. So they might be a bit more stricter in terms of their admission. But the effect, would be minimal. There's no, I think the only easiness, how easy it is, would just be in terms of the number of seats. A girls' school will have more seats. They'll probably have the whole cohort of 120 will be girls, as opposed to saying only 60 will be girls. But again, it just depends on the overall demand for the school. So the only real difference with gender parity model will be within the school in terms of the distribution between girls and boys and their performance, and not necessarily between co-ed and single-sex schools. Can we book multiple consultations with the academic consultant? Are these paid sessions? Nope, these are not paid sessions. And yes, you can definitely book multiple consultations. We do request parents to come in and do a consult every few weeks to track the progress, to make it a bit easier. You're more than welcome to do a consult at the end of this term and then at the end of the April holiday program. Whatever will make it easier for you to figure out if the school figure out your school preferences and monitor your child's progress. But so Borkham Hills is ranked 7th and Hornsby is 8th. Aren't these extremely close and be a risk of putting them both down? Yeah, so I think you may be referring to it in terms of the HSC ranking. And yes, Borkham Hills and Hornsby as per the HSC results of 2025, are very close. But in terms of the difficulty to get into it as a selective school, it's based on demand. Borkham Hills does have more demand and has had more demand historically. A lot of parents put that in as their preference. So and in comparison to Hornsby, and the demand for Hornsby is obviously dependent on, number one, it's a girls' school, and number two, it's a bit further away, so less parents are inclined to put it down, and so there is that big difference in terms of the ranking. So you can see here, in terms of admission difficulty, Borkham Hills is the second most difficult school to get admission into, and Hornsby is the seventh. And that's, again, different to the HSC preference. So HSC ranking, it's based on demand. Penrith, Hurlstone, and Gosford. Is this fine? Till Hurlstone is green, and then Penrith goes orange 3 to 4 times. Yep, that's totally fine. You, as long as you're like, if Penrith is a school that you're willing to get your child into, that can be your first preference for sure. And if you're looking for, and Gosford, if that's the lowest school you're willing to send your child to, that's totally fine. I think your list that makes sense. I think you might find you might be a bit more comfortable in your choice if Penrith comes up as orange a bit more consistently, and that just comes down to just making sure that the student is improving over the next 2 months. And if you're looking for specific advice, definitely go ahead and book a consult, just so that we have an advisor to look through your report specifically. Is it okay if we put a middle selective school as our first, a low school as our second, and a high school as our third for our selective application? I think you may be referring to in terms of like the order. You always put the highest ranking school, or like the school that's the most difficult to get into, as your first preference. And then the second one will be the middle school, and the third will be the lowest school. I don't think you definitely shouldn't flip it around, because if your child gets a score, performs well enough to get into, say, Sydney Boys, but your preference for Sydney Boys is the lowest, and your top preference is Parramatta, then you'll be only offered for Parramatta. You won't be offered any of your other schools. So it's really, really important to make sure that your school preferences are in order of difficulty. Most difficult first, and then the lowest school should be, like, I guess, the easiest to get into. If my choice 1 is in the waiting list and I keep it on hold, then will I be given the offer of my choice 2? If my choice was, yeah, so I mean, I think that just depends. Sometimes students get reserve offers from a school, but won't get an offer from a subsequent school. That happens. Sometimes a student scores in sort of that in-between area where it's, potentially not good enough for this school, but good enough to be on a reserve list for a different school. So it really depends. You are able to be placed on the waiting list for as long until December, until the end of the year, and only then they'll make you make a decision between staying on the reserve list and accepting an offer, or just rejecting your offer and just staying on the waiting list and rejecting your offer, or accepting your offer and being removed from the waiting list. If you hold your waiting list choice, it doesn't really suggest whether you'll get the offer from your second choice. So, like, if you hold it, doesn't necessarily mean you are going to get a choice from the second school. There's no impact. It just purely is dependent on how the student does in the exam. So if the student does well enough to get an offer and a reserve offer, then that's what will be offered to you. You'll see both of those come up on the portal, on your application portal. If they only get that reserve offer, that's all you'll see. Is Borkham Hills, Hornsby, Gira, or Hornsby, Gira, and Penrith better for a female student? I think the first thing from these orders, the first thing that I would flag is that Hornsby girls and Girraween are close on your preference list. So in that situation, then I would probably go for Hornsby girls over Girraween and choose a school that's lower than Girraween as your last preference. Do Borkham Hills, Hornsby, and something else down here, Penrith maybe, Hurlstone. I think that one's probably what I would recommend for a girl, like a female student. The other one is also, yeah, again, it's just Hornsby and Gilween. I probably wouldn't put down in one application. I would do Baulkham Hills Hornsby something else, or Hornsby Penrith something else. I missed the part of what the difference is between partially selective and fully selective. Yep. So fully selective is the entire cohort of students. Say there's 120. Entire cohort has passed a entry level point to make it into the school, so they're all above a specific academic threshold. The entire school. In partially selective schools like Parramatta and Blacktown, there's only 30 to 60 students per cohort, so only 2 classes. That would be a like a selective class, and then the remainder of the school will be local comprehensive catchment students. So I think that's probably the biggest difference between the two. In year 11 and 12 for partially selective schools, you are no longer separated into selective classes, and in year 11 and 12 you'll have to they mingle with the rest of the students in classes, but up until then they're in separate, like a selective class in comparison to the rest of the students. And so because partially selective schools also have students from like a comprehensive and local schools, and because selective students are entirely students who are at a specific point academically, it can just mean that they have a little bit more of an edge in the HSC, because the HSC does take into account how the entire school cohort performs. And so a school that has students who are already quite like academically gifted, the whole school has academically gifted students, then the HSC marks for that school might be a little bit higher than students who are in like a local partially selective high school. That's the sort of major difference there. I have applied my daughter for Auburn Girls as my most safer school, and I put Girraween and my highest. So does that mean they will cancel out Auburn Girls if she gets the reserve for Girraween? Not necessarily. They might give you a reserve offer for Girraween and an offer for Auburn Girls. That's definitely possible. But in December, they'll make you choose between staying on the reserve for Girraween and staying on the reserve, or going into Auburn. Another thing to consider is that you might not, even if Girraween is your preference, and if Girraween is your second preference, say, and Auburn is your third preference, and you get Auburn, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will get a reserve offer to Girraween, because essentially what they do is they have like a range of performance, like an entry level mark for, okay, this is what the student needs to get in order to be eligible for an offer. Then they'll have a range of performances that the student will have to be in to receive a reserve offer. So if your student is out of that range, they may not receive a reserve, and they might just receive an offer from Auburn Girls. Hopefully that answers your question. North Sydney, Hurlstone, and Tempe is a sufficient spacing. Perfect. There is a good gap between those schools, and if Tempe is the lowest selective school or partially selective school you're willing to send your child to, that's totally fine for your third preference. Yeah, it's just like a safety net school essentially. If you can go higher. Hurlstone, I think, like after Hurlstone, like the next school that I would suggest would be like Parramatta. So if you don't want to do Tempe, then you can do Parramatta. But the gap that you have, do agricultural schools focus more on agriculture, or is it the same for all STEM subjects? Agriculture is a subject that's taught at schools, and for schools that are agricultural schools like Hurlstone and James Roos, agriculture is a mandatory subject that they will do from year 9 to 10. But that doesn't mean, so from agriculture is a mandatory subject they'll teach from year 7 to 10. That doesn't necessarily mean that they will disregard science and maths and English, because those are also very core subjects. It just means that agriculture is another core subject that students will need to do alongside everything else. So they're not going to be like putting more focus on the agricultural part of it. It'll just be an additional thing that they'll have to do in comparison to students who there's no agriculture for it in their school. So like Hurlstone will have an agricultural subject, but they, like Girraween, might not. I'll just do the last question. Does the school average help in boosting the ATAR of the student? Is that the reason why fully selective and partially selective schools are most preferred? Yep, that's exactly why. So they will look at the cohort of performances. So in the HSC, if most of the time in selective schools, the students will all perform in a similar range and they are high performing. And then there's a few factors that go into it. And one of the factors is the consideration of how the school performs. So if your child is sort of sitting in the average of their selective score, but the whole school has performed quite well, then their mark might be boosted a little bit more. In comparison, if you're going to a comprehensive school, because there are, that's not to say that comprehensive schools there's no academically gifted students, there are a wider range of performances. You have students who perform really well and students who perform maybe not so well, so the range of performances is quite big. And then as a result, if your child is average over there, they may not actually be pushed up just because of how big the range is. There's also some other things that go into it that they don't really divulge what those factors are, but that is one of it, and that's probably why parents go are more inclined to select a selective school. I'll just do the last 3 questions. So for a boy, Balcombe Hills, Fort Street, and Chatswood, is this good to choose? Yep, that's totally fine. That's a good gap between each of the schools. Fort Street and Chatswood are a little bit close, so if you can put a school lower than Chatswood, that would probably make you feel have a bit more of a safety net. But if you're not comfortable doing lower than that, then this is still a good distribution. Balcombe Hills, Girwin, and Sydney Tech, right distribution. Yep, that's perfectly fine. I think that's quite a good distribution. How big is the gap or difficulty to get in between James Roos and Balcombe Hills? It is a bit of a difference. So James Roos is definitely more difficult to get into than Balcombe Hills. So if your child is high performing and you want to put both of those schools down, that's okay to do. There is a big gap between those two schools in terms of admission difficulty for sure. Okay, so that will just wrap up the Q&A session. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. If you enjoyed the session, please subscribe to our channel and follow us on our other social media channels, Facebook, WeChat, Little Red Book, where we announce any other seminars to hold. This session, again, is recorded and it's under our live tab, so you're more than welcome to go and check it out after the session has ended. And all the resources that I've mentioned is in the description of this video, so definitely check for more information. Thank you so much, guys.